the civil service, for example, you can't just get promoted or appointed out of the blues. You enter from point one, level one. There is a process that you go through. If it is promotion, there is one major thing upon which they rely. One of the requirements is to rely on the appraiser of the individual on his job or her job. Appraiser of his performance on certain targets set by the officer and the supervisor, agreed goals and objectives. So when you enter the next level after the promotion interview or whatever, it means you have earned it. You are not down because they look at you because you are beautiful or handsome or always smiling at the supervisor. You satisfy certain conditions before you are promoted.
Wonderful. So I'm just looking at the administrative instructions for the Ghana Civil Service. And if you look at chapter 2, it's on staff recruitment, development, and progression. And under recruitment, it says that the recruitment of staff into the civil service shall be in accordance with the scheme of service and subject to the existence of a human resource plan for the ministry or department. B, an approved vacancy. And C, a financial clearance. The two under recruitment says that recruitment shall be based on the needs of the ministry or department and not on any other consideration. Then finally, 3, whenever it is desired to fill any post in the civil service, the first consideration shall be given to a qualified serving officer or officers. And so these could be part of possibly the many indicators or considerations
for the promotion
or the recruitment. So are these that form part of the meritocracy in appointment?
Yeah, like he defined the definition, he gave the definition of the meaning of meritocracy. It means you are fit to a certain pattern of that position. The requirements are fulfilled. And then if along the line you don't meet some of the requirements, you could not be promoted or appointed. So it's a pattern. You deserve it. That is the merit. That is it.
Okay, so we are looking at merit-based promotions or appointments into the civil service. But then if you look at Section 10 of the Civil Service Act, PNDC Law 327, chief directors are classified as public officers. What's the distinction? Does it mean that they are civil servants?
They are civil servants. They are civil servants in the first and foremost position. But if you look at the general globe of the public service, civil service is part of the services in the public service. So it can be considered, it can be referred to as a public servant. But a typical civil servant is civil servant.
Doc, I want to get, because sometimes the misunderstanding or the ambiguity surrounding these laws is what possibly lead to what people perceive to be an abuse, or what you might ever call it. And so if today you hear that a chief director has been appointed, let's say by government, wouldn't it be because at Section 19 of the Civil Service Act, PNDC Law 327, describe chief directors as public officers?
Right. I think this question is very, very important in the light of the classification of persons in the public sector generally. You know, if you look at the public services, that is the part of the Constitution with public services, which is Chapter 14 of the 1992 Constitution, from Article 190 running through to 199. It gives the various organizations that makes up the public services. And all employees within the public services are public officers, the whole public officers. But there are various categories of public officers. And within the categories is the civil service category, or those who work in the civil service being referred to as civil service officials or civil service staff. Of course, the term civil servant traditionally has been used, but in recent times we have been advised that we have to move away from the servitude mentality to an office-holding mentality. Maybe that's a debate for another day. But, and so the point I was making is that all public officials within the public services are public officers, but there are various categories of public officers. And then we have civil service, or civil servants, or civil service officials as one of the categories. Now, if you look at Section 19 of the Civil Service Act, which defines the chief director as a public officer, it makes it controversial, because the controversy that arises therein is, why would the chief director be singled out, be described as a public officer and not the term a civil service official? You know, and so that particular clause has sometimes been interpreted by some to mean that the chief director is not a civil servant. That is, by those who want to maybe appoint persons outside the body of civil service, they interpret that clause to mean that, well, a chief director is not someone who necessarily is a civil service, official or a civil servant, and that a chief director can be anybody who can be appointed from anywhere in the public services. And so it depends on the issue of interpretation as to how one interprets. But traditionally, I mean, if you look at the historical development of our civil service until these kind of definitions, the position of a civil servant, that is the previous permanent secretaries, has always been that of a civil servant and has not been isolated and then placed in the category of a public officer through which someone may misinterpret it. And so if we construe the chief director from the historical development of our civil service, then one will say that the chief director is a civil servant. But if one were to look at how this particular clause has been framed, one could also interpret that to mean that the chief director is not a civil servant. As I said, it depends on how one looks at it. Because I refer, for instance, to the famous Supreme Court's ruling in 2015, where some people challenged some officials working in the education service and health service that they could not continue to work in the education service or health service because they have contested for some party positions. And then the Supreme Court ruled that those organizations are not, strictly speaking, civil service organizations. And if you read the ruling of the Supreme Court, that he played around the words of public office, public officer, and then as distinct from civil service or civil servant. And so if one were to look at the legal construction of this, as I said, one could interpret it to mean that the chief director is not a civil servant. But historically, the position has always been held by a civil servant.
Mr. Kakani, I think we need you here. What is the difference between public service and the civil service?
I thought,
Because he said that
yes,
there is some ambiguity there, and a chief director can be considered as a public service servant and also a civil servant.
yeah,
Because we want to dovetail into the appointment of the chief director
yeah.
and the role and responsibility of the appointing authority. So please, we need to get this clear first.
Let's start from the clear picture of who a civil servant is. and who a public officer is. And he has explicitly said it, but I'll also look at it as a globe. And the whole totality of the globe has facets, small dots. Each one on its own public service. The services that the police render, the services that the teachers render, the services that the social welfare or civil servants render, the services that the prisons, immigration, you get it, they are all public services. But uniquely, we have the civil service rendering a unique services to the public on behalf of Ghana government. And the other time we continue to state it that if you look at it, and then from the perspective of the Supreme Court ruling in 2017 one, is that you are singled out to be representing anonymity, representing neutrality, and representing permanence in in your service that we are rendering to the people. Other public services could not have the same requirements, but we are a public service, but we've a name, and the name is civil service, and we are unique.
Okay, so let me help us here.
Okay.
If we talk about the public service, and because it says the Constitution says that the public services of Ghana shall include the civil service, the judicial service, the audit service, the education service, the prison service, parliamentary service, health service, statistical service, fire service, and on and on. And so I don't think that there should be any confusion about who a civil service personnel is and who is a public service personnel. All of them cumulatively can call them public servants. But then within the rank and file of public servants, we have, let's say, a civil servant. And I think earlier on one of these engagements, we established the fact that the chief director position is a civil service position. I don't know, I stand to be corrected.
Yeah, you need to be corrected, because if you look at the way it is couched in the Constitution, the Act, once they have used the public officer, although a civil servant is a public officer, it means they have opened it to other officers from the public, so it is competitive.
So it now goes beyond the scope of the civil service.
Yes, that's what they know. I think in the amendment, we should make it a career. We should go back to the old system, where the head, the person who is representing the whole civil service, should be an example. If you are supposed to be neutral, it should be an example. Because somebody from outside could not be as neutral as we are looking at them before appointing.
Yeah.
So subsequent amendments should take care of this.
So in that case, who has the legal mandate, the responsibility of appointing a chief director? Maybe Doc, you can help.
Right. And so, once again, because the position is described as a public officer, making it that's kind of open. If you go to, once again, the Constitution, the same chapter 14, the public services, who appoints the public persons working in the public service? Particularly, I want to refer to Article 195, because the Civil Service Bill that is being worked on makes reference to 195. So 195 clause 1 says, subject to the provisions of this Constitution, the power to appoint persons to hold or to act in an office in the public services, that is all the public services, shall vest in the President, acting in accordance with the advice of the governing council of the service concerned, given in consultation with the Public Services Commission. And then clause 2 is particularly is particularly important. The president may, subject to such conditions as he may think fit, delegate some of his functions under this article by directions in writing to the governing council concerned, or to a committee of the council, or to any member of the governing council, or to any public officer. And so now comes to your question, who has the power to appoint? The power to appoint vests in the president. However, the president may delegate this power to the governing council of the service concerned, or to a committee of the council, or to any member of that governing council. So it could be an individual that the president delegates that power, or to any public officer. That public officer may not be within the governing council, and so maybe even outside. So the president may decide to delegate that power, let's say even to the minister who is also a public officer there, or to any other public officer within the public services of Ghana as he may think fit. And so it is very, very open, but it says that it should be done in writing. So it is not something that the president can do orally.
And
there should be
with
there should be a document that is there. But in the written here, in that clause 2, it does not actually state that in delegating that power, he should do that in consultation with the governing council. Of course, if we were to read it holistically in line with clause 1, 190 clause 1, the power to appoint is vested in the president acting in accordance with the advice of the governing council. And then he may then delegate that power now to the governing council itself, or to a committee of the council, or to a member of the council, or to any other officer. So if an officer has been delegated that power, it means that that officer cannot go ahead and make the appointment without consulting the governing council. Because the president, in making the appointment, will have for the governing council. So the officer who has been delegated that power must also consult the governing council of the service concerned in making the appointment. So it is clear from the constitutional directive that the power to make appointment is vested in the president, but he can delegate that power to a council, a committee of the council, or to a member of the council, or to any public officer. However, that public officer or that member cannot unilaterally make the appointment without also acting in accordance with the advice of the governing council.
Okay, so let's look at Section 19 of the Civil Service Act 1993, PND Law 327.
Right.
And that is on the appointment of chief directors.
Yes.
One says that the president may, acting in accordance with the advice of the Civil Service Council, urged under Section 35, given in consultation with the Public Services Commission, appoint chief directors for the service.
Right.
So I think that clarifies.
Yes, it's clarified that certainly is the president who appoints and he can delegate it.
The chief director appointed under subsection 1 shall hold office as the bureaucratic head of the ministry or office to which that chief director is assigned. Then it says that the chief director is a public officer.
This shall be.
The chief director
Shall be a public officer.
Okay, but from where I'm reading,
You are
saying,
reading-
Okay, that
Yes,
is a-
yes.
a public
It's a public officer.
officer.
That's plus 3.
then the appointment of the chief director shall be on the terms and conditions that are specified in the letter of appointment.
Yeah.
Okay, so then it is clear. But then in this appointment procedure, I wanted to find out what are the roles of the civil service itself, like the office of the head of the civil service, the Public Services Commission, and maybe the presidency. do they play distinct roles or what do you call it, complementing roles?
Complementary, collaborative. If you take this office of the head of civil service, for example, that is the office that houses the administrative hub of the civil service, the bureaucracy. That is where we even have the Civil Service Council, which is the governing council advising government on appointments and other things, also in running the civil service. So you realize that they say the delegate power to the Civil Service Council or the council, the governing council in concern. Their role is to advise appropriately. For example, you are appointing an officer, let's say a public officer into the civil service. Then they will say, sir, this is what are the requirements in the civil service. If you check the Constitution and then the Supreme Court's ruling, it should not calculate, for example. So the role of the office of the head of civil service is to be ready all the time to work in collaboration with the president, advising the president as to what to do in appointments of directors, chief directors, and other officers into the civil service, so that they fall in tune, they fit it properly. It is supposed to be on advice.
Okay, but then I want to find out. You keep referring to the chief director per the law as a public officer. Then we have the civil service, which is part of the public service. Now, you are saying that the public officer so appointed would have to align to the dictates of the civil service.
Requirement, yes.
So, if the person is a public officer, it means he may not necessarily be a civil servant, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the post as a chief director may not be civil service post.
Let's get this clear.
We need to get a clarity,
Yes, the
because
issue is that
if the person is a public service, is a public officer, and coming to occupy a public office post, then the reporting line will be the office of the civil service, head of civil service. That's what I want to get, because if the person comes and he must condone and abide by the rules and dictates of the civil service, then that makes him a civil servant.
The issue is that where is the public officer coming in? It's not the police service. It's neither the immigration service. If it is going to be immigration service, they might have gotten their regulations, their rules, their requirements upon which the government will act or the president will act. So in the civil service too, it is a civil service position, fair. But the issue is that they have made it open that anybody can come, a public person can come. But when you come, it's the Civil Service Council that should advise the president that these are the rules. If you want us to be neutral, if you want us to be permanent, and then anonymity, for us to be able to render services to your people, the people of Ghana, without fear and favor, then the person must be
So basically, the office or the position of a chief director is a civil service position.
Yes.
But then the occupation of that position is open to the entire public service.
Yes.
But then once you come in, because it's a civil service position, you must adhere to the dictates and the principles of the civil service.
Let me correct that one. Not necessarily once you come in. Whilst entering, they'll vet you to see whether you are actually a civil servant, a person who is not political.
So then the principles
You are not exposed.
of NAM would apply.
Yes.
Neutrality,
So the vetting,
anonymity.
the time that they are vetting or they are recruiting you during the process, if they like, they can go and check your background so that you can, as an example at the top, you must be seen to be showing the examples of neutrality. That is, if the council is firm to advise anyway.
Wow. I don't know whether you have any perception.
Right. So I want to be very careful in terms of how the law is crafted and the structure of the public services, in Ghana. I've always maintained that, the structure of the civil service itself contains many inconsistencies in terms of the principles that govern how a civil service organization is supposed to be created. The creation of a civil service organization is an organization that should be depoliticized.
That's it.
And should not see or have this political hand of the president or the executive
At all.
appointing the bureaucratic head of the civil service.
That's it.
The last time I was here with former head of the civil service, I strenuously emphasize the point that by making the position of the chief director, describing it as a public officer, it dilutes the principles of the civil service. Because historically, and the civil service that has been created or that was created and developed in Ghana was not one where the position of the chief director or the bureaucratic head resided in the at the presidency or resided in the hands of a president. If you look at the emergence of the civil service
from the colonial time,
from Britain, of course, Britain did not innovate it, but they were the first to have used that concept. The whole structure of the civil service, I mean, they also borrowed this from somewhere, from Asia, and then they created. But if you look at the recommendations of the 1854, so Northcote and Sir Trevelyan, their recommendations on how to create the civil service. The recommendation was that appointments and then promotions into the civil service should be based on merit. And people should rise to the highest office on the grounds of merit. Okay? And through competitive examinations or through whatever medium of competitive examinations that you create. So it was not one where people outside the organizations will be picked or appointed to come and then, head that particular organization. If you compare that also to the American Civil Service Act of 1883, you similar kind of rules there. That appointment into the service, promotions into the service should be on the basis of merit. And the positions at the highest level should be awarded to those who really merited it in the service. Now here comes the case, the situation of Ghana, where we have practiced this for a very, very long period of time. And then now come closer now to the dawn of independence. We create a civil service law, of course now that term act. But if you look at, it's because the constitution itself was adopted in 1992. It came into force in 1993. But the act was made before even the first sitting of parliament. Yeah. It didn't go through parliamentary debates and then discussions. And then we make this particular act, and then we smuggle it in that the president cannot just only appoint someone to become a chief director, but the position a public officer, which means that the president can appoint anyone from outside the civil service structure. So it dilutes and it away the jewel within the civil service from those who have dedicated all their lifetime to serving in the organizations, and then now thinking that, well, I may not be the one who will rise now to become the chief director. The position is not reserved for only civil servants. Anybody outside of the civil service can be appointed. And so that, at the end of the day, is not a good thing. And so going for instance, if you look at the current civil service amendments, you see that that particular clause that the chief director is a public officer has been taken away.
It should be taken away.
It's not there anymore because it undermines the principles of a civil service organization. So that clause 3 is no longer there.
Doc, hold your breath. I want us to take a short break. And when we come back, we want to we'll digest the principle of NAP, neutrality, anonymity, and especially permanence.
Right.
In the perspective of the appointment of a chief director should be a public officer. To see, because within the principle of permanence, there's progression. And to see whether how public officer recruitment or appointment into the position of chief director undermines this principle, and how we can adhere to it. So viewers, stay tuned. It's getting really interesting, and when we come back, we'll diverge the conversation deeper and deeper. We'll be right back.
Right.
Labor, they say, is the backbone for national development. playing a vital role in shaping economic growth, fostering social stability, and enhancing overall productivity. As the workforce undergoes continuous transformation, it is crucial to not only educate but also to actively engage all stakeholders in meaningful discussions on labor policies, workers' rights, and current labor trends. In responding to these pressing needs, Clock TV introduces Walatu Walasa, a dynamic and engaging program dedicated exclusively to exploring the multifold realms of labor issues. This innovative program aims to provide a robust platform for in-depth discussions surrounding employment relations, the rights of workers, the quest for industrial harmony, and evolving landscape of work. Walatu Walasa seeks to bring to bear the challenges and opportunities facing the labor force today, making a significant contribution to public discourse. My name is Edmond Akwe, your host for Walatu Walasa.
Welcome back, cherished viewers, to Researching the Civil Service. And today we are discussing the topic, contested appointments and the erosion of meritocracy in the civil service. And to discuss and digest on this topic with me is the Deputy General Secretary of CLOSAC, Mr. Kakani. The Deputy
It's not General Secretary, Executive Secretary.
The Deputy Executive Secretary of CLOSAC, Mr. Kakrani, as well as the lecturer from University of Ghana Business School, Dr. Daniel Appiah. When we went on research, before we went on research, you were giving us historical and cross-continent perspective of the issue of appointments into higher positions. And we wanted you to look at it in perspective of the principles of the civil service, neutrality, anonymity, permanence. The perception is that permanence ensures progression, ensures life service. I mean, it gives hope that one would rise. So once you're working, you have the hope that you would also rise into the next grade. With the appointment of chief directors as public officers, where a non-civil service personnel could possibly be appointed into the office of a chief director, how that this is? I want you to give the perspective as you started, given what operates with our previous colonial masters, the British, the Americans, and then to Ghana with regards to the NAP.
Right. Thank you very much. So the issue even first is, why was a civil service created? Starting from the UK perspective, the civil service was created because the then existing public service, had deteriorated to the extent that higher positions in the public services could be purchased if you have the money, or if you were linked to the royal family, or if you knew someone in a higher position of authority, then you use your clientelistic relationship to influence your appointment into that position. So it got to a time that the public service became very, very inefficient. Many people who did not have the skills and the knowledge to actually perform functions that were being required from them. And so that led to the establishment of the committee led by Senator Coates and Trevelyan to find the best way of reforming the public services in the UK. And it was through their research and then travels that they came across the creation of an organization in the Asian countries where persons were appointed on the basis of merit, on the basis of competitive examinations. And then they recommended that the UK could create an organization called the civil service on the basis of merit, competitive examinations, and promotions should be done also on the basis of merit, competitive examinations. And of course, to be retained in the service also, one could be retained by assessing the performance of the person, whether the person has actually delivered the job that he or she has been given. And so appointment into the services, it wasn't a situation where once you were appointed at that time, then you remain in the service forever. You were put on probation actually to test whether or not really you merited the position for which you have been appointed. It was to deal with the situation where it was possible for some people to get into the service through some political relationship or patronage kind of relationships, and yet they didn't have the skill or knowledge. And so once you get into the service, and after 2 years or 3 years, they realize that then you were fired from the system. And it was this kind of system that the British administration transferred to the Gold Coast, now current Ghana. And the situation where people were promoted on the basis of their performance to the highest level is stimulated competition to perform functions and then to deliver of one's knowledge. To the extent that Ghana was reputed to have created one of the best civil service administration systems in the entire British colonial administration, not just in Africa, but the entire British colonial administration, including British colonies in Asia. And even at independence, we saw countries like South Korea, Singapore, and others coming to Ghana to really learn about how we were able to create that. And so the system where people could work, give their very best, and expect the highest prizes in terms of promotion to the top is that stimulated hard work, and to the top performance, people deliver their very best. And so if you have a system like that, as we've seen in the developed countries, in UK or in Germany, and then also in the Gold Coast, now delivering that kind of development, it's one that really stimulates development. It promotes people to, it enables people to actually look forward to the highest prizes, and it builds that spirit, of hard work, and people willing to deliver their very, very best, and they hope that one day they also get to the top. And so that is the principle and logic of the civil servants across countries where the principles have actually been practiced. It is only US later when their party, competitive, partisan, democratic kind of systems encroach on civil service administration in the US. Up to date, we still see the US suffering from encroachment into the civil service to the extent that now they've created this executive class where people outside the civil service are now appointed to head civil service organizations, and it is affecting them and undermining them. For countries that have really stick to the principles of civil service organization, where people are promoted from below through the ranks to the highest offices, it has really helped them very, very well. So that generally is the character and then the logic of a civil service organization, and the result to the extent that, as I said, that Ghana really gained independence as a shining example of economic development in Africa and within the colonial administration. It was a shining example not because some governor had done the work, but the civil service in the Gold Coast had really delivered. And as you and I know, all the organizations in the public services were within the civil service. Yes. It was with time that now different organizations were balkanized and then taken out of the civil service. So it was the principles of the civil service that really made Ghana to become the Ghana that everybody wanted to come and see. And so, if really practiced very well, it has promised actually to deliver the results in terms of development.
Mr. Kakani,
Yeah.
you know, if you look at the section 20, subsection 1 of the Civil Service Act 1993, PNC Law 327, it talks about the functions of a chief director.
Section 20.
21. So section 20 talks about the functions. But I want us to focus on the clause 1.
Yeah.
It says that a chief director of a ministry is the chief advisor to the minister on the policies and other matters related to the sector, and shall, in relation to the ministry, provide leadership guidance. But I want us to focus on the providing the
Advice.
provision of the advisory function.
Yeah.
For one to be able to advise on a subject matter or an issue, it means that the person has an exposure or experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want us to look at this advisory function vis-a-vis a public officer
Yeah.
who isn't a civil service personnel and has been brought in. How effectively and efficiently can the person perform this role?
It's a very good question.
As against the permanent, somebody who has
Run through the ranks. It's a very good question.
Because again, let me add this one, because per the civil service administrative
Instructions.
instructions are supposed to operate within the same environment for 10 years. He's posted around.
Yeah.
And these are the career building and
exposures.
knowledge. Yeah, so you can look at it with that.
In actual fact, the advisor to advise connotes a lot of information. It's not on the surface of it. If a president say, this is my senior or principal presidential advisor on pensions, it means that person is a store of knowledge, experience, and skills. So
Chief advisor.
now the civil servant, the chief director, is supposed to be the chief advisor to the president on civil service matters, not on other service matters. And that person couldn't have done it better than if the person ran through the ranks, acquiring knowledge, training and retraining, going up and down, advising from. That is the thing. You know, I said it here before. A senior civil servant, retired, told us that the civil servant, senior level, must be in position to know the ruling government manifesto more than even the government. Reminding them of it, sir, we are not item 21. This is the time you're supposed to do this. You must be able to bring the president up to his own manifesto. It is only a senior civil servant, a seasoned civil servant, well motivated, that can do that. No doubt, our mentor, Nathan Kwao of blessed memory, said it. It's all over the walls of CROSAC and all over the world of the civil service. It takes the civil servant to move the nation forward. The profession of the civil servant to move the nation forward, not the politician. So we are to have, and they are coming. It's temporary. Do you know it's 8 years the highest? But the civil service is supposed to stay forever. So the institutional memory is there. So you capture on that one and advise. I want to do this. Say yes, we can do this one and this one. In the terms of this one, that is it. So for you to be appointed from the outside, do you know the requirements? It's 15 years. And this 15 years from the public is not 15 years in the civil service. In the civil service, you are supposed to be serving as a director position 7 years. Added to the years that you have already served. So you are entering 22, 25, 28 years. And somebody from outside is serving in the public service at 15 years. Not even 1 hour in the civil service. What advice can he give to the president in relation to civil service issues? So it is very proper for government to be committed to look at the requirements properly and do the needful. If we are supposed to have a chief director to be a chief advisor, then they should look at it properly and do the right thing. Like it is rightly said, that the review has actually deleted that nebulous.
Well, but for now, what we have is what
Yes,
we are dealing
that is
with.
fine.
So
Yeah.
that's where we focus on.
In actual fact, we are
And
suffering because of the fact that we have diluted, or we are in the process of diluting everything in the civil service by politicization. If you care to know, we should not be afraid to point it out. The civil servant season 1 should not be afraid to point out to the politician that, say, if you do this, it will not augur well. But because this is why we find ourselves. You have the examples of Minister of Finance 8 years ago. Crossack was the first to cry foul that the government apparatus are too many. Nobody heeded us. Nobody supported us. There are too many. They came to encumber the positions in the civil service. They came to take the trainings outside and inside away. And then they are going. When the government is gone, they go with them. What is the performance of the Ghana's economy? Ministry of advisors, political apparatus. That is it. A chief director is supposed to be a chief advisor to the minister, to the president, to wherever. In those days, you can call them. Mr. Sai, we didn't meet them. Some of us met them faintly. Nathan Kwao, big time civil servant. And when they sit in cabinet, you realize that the whole of the meeting depends on their memory, their institutional memory, their knowledge, their experience, their composure, their confidence. Let's go, it will be this way. But we get novices and bring them along because of political affiliations.
So Doc, if we continue to maintain a status quo where non-civil service employees can be engaged, employed into the position of a chief director, what happens to the career progression of the civil personnel? What happens to their morale? What happens to their motivation? And above all, how does it impact on productivity? Then, does it mean that what will become the highest cap on the state of civil service employee?
Right. This is
A little question.
yes, but a very important one. So one is not saying that the appointment of persons from outside the civil service will necessarily impair the ability of that person to offer policy advice. If you look at the functions of the chief director, offering policy advice is only one out of many. So when it comes to the function of the civil service in the area of initiating policy, formulating policy, someone for the civil service will be able to certainly advise a minister in those kind of areas. But once again, as I said, that is only one of those functions. If you look at the civil service regulations, a chief director is the head of many classes within the civil service. If you look at the regulations, that is section 11. Let me read something from here where we see the head of the civil service where the chief director is the head. The chief director is the head of the administrative and management class. So aside offering advice on policy matters, you also to advise on how the administrative and management class should be managed and how they should be organized. The chief advisor is the head of the executive and clerical class. If you've not worked in the system for that long, how will you know how that system has been working? The chief director is the head of the secretarial class. If you've not worked in the system for that long or with them, how will you be able to advise the minister or the organization in matters concerning them? The chief director is the head of the information technology and mind class. The chief director is the head of the planning class. The chief director is the head of security, estate, tradesmen, transport, catering, and many other. And so it takes someone who has acquired years of working experience, working with these various classes within the civil service, to be in a position to advise that if we organize them this way,
that is how they will be productive. Coming to your question of productivity, how do you ensure productivity? And so if you've not worked in the system with them, having risen through the rank on the basis of promotion to earn their respect, to earn your positions on the basis of merit, for people to know that you've earned it on the basis of merit and you have knowledge across all these classes in terms of how they work and how they are supposed to work, it will be very, very difficult for you to perform your functions. Once again, as I said, your function in terms of offering policy advice, you can do it. But in terms of the management of the entire services, management across all these classes, you may be found wanting. Not even may, but you will certainly be found wanting because you don't have the experience. You don't have the institutional memory. You don't know how these various classes actually do their work, how they perform their functions. You are coming in there, and in fact, on what basis are you going to even advise these various classes as to how they should do their job when you yourself, you don't know how their job is done? So it is on that basis that across the world, wherever civil service has worked very well, or in the Gold Coast when civil service has worked very well, the bureaucratic positions that are the topmost has been filled by people who have risen through the ranks, acquired experience, know how the system is organized, know how the various classes are supposed to relate. When it comes to even the reorganization of certain classes, they know exactly how to advise. But if you don't know, if you've not worked with them for this for so many years, and it takes decades of experience and having worked with them to acquire that, it's not just a matter of getting in there and you think that within a year or two you can gain that kind of knowledge.
You can also touch on the implication of such appointments on career progression, especially the permanent aspect of the principal.
On the permanent aspect, it means that the implication of appointing someone from outside, it creates discontinuity.
Yes.
Discontinuity of institutional memory. It creates discontinuity in terms of, the expectations of those who have worked in the very long decades. It cuts short their dreams and ambitions to also the very top. And those who are below will take cue. I remember Mr. Domelobo, when he left the office, that's the former auditor, when he left office, and when we asked him, why is it that your predecessor, the one who came after you, is not doing what you were doing by such as he said, the tree under which Kweku Anansi died. In Tekuma, when I gets there, in Tekuma will take a cue by learning from what happened to Kweku Anansi. So if you've seen what has happened at the end of the day, to the fact that what has happened to those cautious ahead of you, yes, you are cautious, that they did get the highest prizes in terms of in spite of the fact that they've given their all, morning, afternoon. Sometimes you go to a ministry and find people working at the as dawn, very late at night. They've given their all, and yet it comes to appointment to the highest positions, and then they have been overlooked. Will you want to kill yourself for the system? And so it undermines the issue of a permanence in terms, because as Mr. Krakani said, at the end of the day, when the political class is moving away, you will also be moved, if not within, even if you are not going to work in the same system, they will move you to another organization where your relevance now becomes less relevant, or where your visibility becomes minimal, and then they also bring in their own. What then happens to the permanence of knowledge that we are looking for? What then happens to the permanence of policy implementation that we are looking out for? And so it really affects the permanence of policy implementation, the permanence of integrity, the permanence of work, the permanence of many other things that really affects productivity. And so it is important that we have to look at appointment into the positions of chief director, and coming down even to the position of director too. Because whilst we are focused on chief director, if you read the same Civil Service Act, at the end of the day, if the position of director too, you are also going to see the hand of the president also in there. And at the end of the day, that is also not something that's going to ensure the permanence.
So Mr. Krakani, if we refer to the administrative instructions, you realize that, I'm trying to even look at the place, there's progression. There's a career path in all the classes. Yes. And it's been designed in such a way that as you progress, your scope is widening,
Yes.
your responsibility is also increasing,
Yes.
and knowledge base is also. Do you think that we therefore need a defined career path into the position of that of a chief director, or it should be left as it is, as a political tool for politicians to fill in, so they would get people that would understand their political agenda well, and those who would execute it to the expectations of what they want? Or
I
something?
think the doctor has already said it, that the best practices across the globe is to maintain non-aligned position. You should not get a chief director or anybody in the civil service to be exposed to any political activities so that they are neutral. There is a reason why they ought to be neutral. Do you know why? The service you are rendering to the public on behalf of government, the recipients of the service should not have a perception about you that you are rendering service because of ABC.
Yeah.
The perception is not from within, from the person receiving the service. So we should never allow it to be politicized. So that position which is allowing government to extend its long hand is destroying the image and the spirit of the civil service, and it's going to affect the services that we are rendering. For example, if you take a typical line, social government officer, that's when you finish the university and you did your training, the departmental training as a social worker. So the next one is senior social, principal social, chief social, then you go on. Only to realize that at a certain point in time, you cannot go beyond, although you are still young, you cannot go beyond because there is a political ladder or whatever platform where people are now traveling from that end to your top. Will you be motivated enough? You will not be motivated. So we should not leave it for, it should be the way it is supposed to be. If you read that the civil service is supposed to be non-political, if you go the way the Supreme Court interpreted it in 2017 for Closak to know that this way, you should not appoint anybody because it should be neutral to allow us to grow from the ground to the top, progress to the top, have the hope and the expectation that as I reach here, all my knowledge will be given a recognition by promoting the top. We know it is only one chief director at a time, and we know it is only one head of civil service at a time, but everybody will strive towards it. And then when you get it, you know that, as uncle, now I have been honored.
Yeah.
We should never tamper with it.
Doc, let's look at the Supreme Court judgment in the case involving the Civil Local Government Staff Association that's closed. On one hand, and on the other hand, we had the Attorney General, Office of the Head of the Civil Service, and Office of the Head of the Local Government Service, where the issue of the principle of neutrality, anonymity, and permanence was emboldened. In this circumstance where the relevant laws gives room for the appointment of a civil service employee, I mean, any public officer into the position of a chief director. So the question is that in the principle of meritocracy, if that person is politically exposed, is there, I mean, would that appointment not infringe on the Supreme Court judgment?
Sure.
Because the person is coming to occupy a civil service position, but then he's a public officer. We are merit-based. One of the merit-based judgment is the fact that the person must be neutral and anonymous. So, if the person happens to be politically exposed, is the appointment merit-based?
If you want me to answer, when we call something political will, it's a discipline you must undertake. if you're a president or a politician, you must do the discipline of every situation. So if your own constitution plus its interpretation is demanding a certain criteria for the civil service, learn to discipline. Don't use the muzzles. Don't be stubborn, because it means you are not regarding the existence or the relevance of that institution. The moment you abuse or disregard or put aside because you are in power, all those things then means you are telling the world that the civil service in Ghana is irrelevant, which is wrong. So therefore, learn to be disciplined, because the civil service is orderly and disciplined. Don't appoint people who are already from the word go are not disciplined or are colored.
So let me take it from where you ended, that the appointee must be disciplined and not colored. The chief director is supervising or superintending over a civil service, but multiple civil service classes who are supposed to be neutral, anonymous. In fact, they must not exhibit any political coloring
At all.
So here is the case where you have a chief director who possibly is politically exposed. How can such a person superintend over a class or institution that is not supposed to be politically exposed? Doc?
I think that this matter it offers a clear-cut, solution. You know, we were here in this country when, at some point, pressure was brought to bear on a former chief director called Alhaji MND Jawula to resign at that time, because people felt that he was politically exposed and he had stood on some political party platforms. And the long and short of it was that in the end, he went away. He resigned. After him, we've seen and here 2022 report, My Joy Online, 20 civil servants for engaging in partisan politics. And so we've seen civil servants who have been sacked for engaging in partisan politics. That now raises the issue of, if civil servants are not supposed to engage in partisan politics, and for which reason if we find civil servants who have mounted political party platforms being sacked, on what basis, logically then, should one appoint a chief director who is politically exposed, politically, belongs to a particular political coloration? Let me read what the Supreme Court said also on this matter. And here we are talking about the ruling was by the Supreme Court given in 2017 by Justice Ekufu. These are justices who are really respected in this country. Justice Ekufu, Justice Enin Yeboah, Justice Bafuboni, who is the acting Chief Justice, Justice Akutobamfo, Justice A. Benin, and Justice Yapeu. And these are renowned justices of the Supreme Court. And they emphasize that...
And it is 7-0.
Yeah. An effective civil service is essential to modern-day democratic society. And a measure of neutrality is necessary in order to preserve that effectiveness. And then they went on to say that best practices, once again, not just the case of Ghana, page 16, best practices and Ghana's socio-political evolution require that no civil servant or local government servant should owe or be perceived to owe appointment or promotion to partisan activities. Partisan activities tend to be obvious and explicit, and they are more often than not visible and known to those in and out of the public service. Once these commitments are known, the principles of neutrality, impartiality, and integrity are weakened and endangered. So once a person who is politically colored is coming in and they know that you are politically colored, these 7 renowned, respected justices of the Supreme Court emphasize
that the principles of neutrality, impartiality, and integrity are weakened and endangered. And so, if someone is appointed into the civil service and the person is politically colored, and then people know your political coloration at the end of the day, it tends to now undermine your effectiveness within the civil service. It is also contradictory to the very principles upon which the civil service has been built and on which grounds others have been sacked. It paints a color of hypocrisy. If others have been sacked because of their political coloration, and I am also politically colored and have been appointed, why will I even accept appointment into that particular position? And so people should, one, check themselves. The good book says that people should examine themselves. If you examine yourself carefully, then one will not bring a measure of judgment to come and then pronounce negative judgment on you. And so if you have been appointed into an organization that is renowned and reputed historically to be one that does not tolerate partisan politics, but you know that you've mounted political platforms and then all that, you have to also, as a matter of, if you really respect your integrity, at the end of the day, say, sir, I think you value my competence. I think you value my skills. But where you are putting me is contradictory to the very principles that they actually practice. So I think that maybe you can put me in another organization where my skills and then knowledge can be put to use and where my political coloration will not be called into question. So people, I think, should also uphold their own personal integrity, and then we also call on governments to actually pay careful attention to these principles that have been affirmed by our Supreme Court judges and that have proven that if at the end of the day Ghana is able to stick to them, we will be able to move forward. But once we begin to undermine, we see that we find ourselves in economic crisis, financial crisis, we go down the hill, and it becomes very, very difficult for us to lift ourselves up. And so we have to really protect these principles that are judged by all.
So, Mr. Kennedy, if you look at the Supreme Court judgment, it was for or against civil service employees.
Yes.
Not to participate in
Partisan
politics.
Yes.
And not public service in entirety.
No.
Someone who is a public servant and there is no demand on him to be neutral, and so proud to the appointment as a chief director, and he even comes into office as a public officer, and so he might have been politically exposed. How can object that same person to the dictates and the principles of
neutrality
within the civil service?
The answer is very simple. The Supreme Court ruling does not say it is loop-sided, it's not one-sided. The officers who are in the service are not supposed to be exposed. Therefore, the person who is even appointing should be the first person to watch out. So the politician or the president or the government that people should be the first to watch out, do profiling, ensure that the person you are appointing from the public service into the civil service is not affected by those requirements. But I use the muzzle because the fact is you are in power, you use the immunity, you don't regard the rulings or the regulations or the laws. If you listen to what the presidency was saying in terms of the register of birth and death, they read the 195 to a certain phrase and stop there. The rest of it are never read. In consultation are never read. Only the area where there is the power is vested in the people supporting. So we are saying that if you know the leader you are appointing must be exemplary in whatever spirit is there, the person must be exemplary, must be neutral, he must be impartial. Then you are appointing the person already from the word go. Then what are you saying? So my beef is with the appointing authorities. They have the guts or the power to punish civil servants that show callous. So they should also resist the temptation of appointing people who are callous. Other than that, we are in effect sending a message to the world that civil service is no longer important. Or we are telling the other civil servants that I will also go in because that is the vogue. That is what is in vogue, which is wrong.
So if civil servants who become politically exposed are punished, then we should not create room for politically exposed persons
To be
in the
brought
civil
in.
service class.
Yes.
Please stay tuned. We shall be right back.
Asamu ma umachi ya mane diania ubinka sebudushi neseshia ibikene
Muwari oba biase oba be uba be mama mi be se be bi se wunu ye
mana ka chawo kana na hunu ho kan hunu won ko ne yiri na wo ba ko
e ba be aba no ma se pani atrase ahedi oyire no mu mienu yi bi ni ma ma oba be ka mi se ko se onye ma do e mi nya ya fo na me se me wa be
ko se e fi wisa ba sada no atati kwatati
wo ma man kan chiro so na nanu eni ma akola no hwe
nim si amamro phone ayedi nipa moja na ya pa enu obetima sesa no so buene kuso esan abrani beyenti umbe so beye
ahom ketu amaba mu dwama no
e be ni ko se be dada se wan fan to be fetro o ba da ben a obesesa amamre nimpo amamre na obesesa no wote ase.
are you
add all those test but like application to something like this. Yes. Oh, that's quick. That's crazy. That was quick. He's gonna be able to draw a level. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah.
Contested appointments and erosion of meritocracy in the civil service is our topic for discussion today. I'm your regular host, Cephas Na Dosu, and with me to discuss this topic is Dr. Daniel Appiah and Mr. Kakani, the Deputy Executive Secretary of CLOSAG. We've discussed the effects of appointing a non-civil service assigned to a civil service position, what the conditions are like, and what we should, and the impact such appointments or transfers into such positions would be or on the civil service personnel, especially in terms of the principle of anonymity, neutrality, and permanence. Now, I want to find out, in the broader spectrum of the public service, what is the migration like? Can we have one moving from one service to the other? But before then, we normally hear postings, we normally hear transfers. Rani can take us through the difference between postings and transfers. Then we can decide to focus on what relates to our topic of discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think in the scheme of things, posting is moving one officer from one place to the other, but within the same organization. For example, civil service, you can be posted from one ministry to the other. But when you talk about transfer, it is a different ballgame altogether. You are moving from one institution to the other. For example, for certain reasons, you decide to be transferred move from the civil service to the Ghana Education Service or Immigration Service. But that one also has its own processes and procedures, which sometimes are called approved transfers. I think in the administrative instructions, it will be there, approved transfers. You don't just come in from another place and join. So those are the difference. That is the difference. Posting is within, transfer to outside.
Yeah, I think the movement and talks about the movement. Yeah, let me see. Okay, so if you look at the chapter 3 of the administrative instructions, it talks about movements within the civil service, and those are referred to as postings. Just like you rightly said. So then we have service with agencies outside the service. Those are the transfers.
Yes.
Fine. So transfers are permissible.
Yes.
So assuming that somebody is working within, let's say, Ghana Education Service, and he is appointed as a chief director, it's more like a transfer, so it's permissible, isn't it?
It's permissible. It's dangerous.
No, but I just want to look on the angle of the transfer.
It's permissible.
Okay, so it is not wrong for one serving in one public service institution to be transferred to a position in another public service institution.
It's not wrong.
Okay,
but it's not
but
common.
then what are the criteria? Because today we are discussing meritocracy.
Yeah.
What are the ingredients that they look out for before those transfers are approved?
I think that might to refer to the administrative instructions, because they are coming in should not come and disadvantage somebody, and they too they are coming in should not disadvantage them. There is a way they look at them. I know of an approved transfer.
Okay, so let's look at the transfers which involves movements outside the. So he said talks about. He said transfer within the civil service is a movement of an officer from one service to the other and may not necessarily involve a change of designation and duties. Transfer may not be effected unless a firm offer of appointment has been made to an officer with the written approval of the head of the civil service and the consent of the affected officer.
Yeah.
The appointing authority is responsible for transferring a departmental grade from one department to another or from one grade to the other. So basically what I want to establish is that if transfer across services are permissible, that means that if somebody is transferred from, let's say, GES as a chief director, there's something wrong about it. But then it is application of the principles.
Yes.
So it means that one of the merits that we need to check is whether the person is neutral.
Yes, highly
and anonymous. Isn't it?
Yeah. That is why they stress that the head of civil service have to write a letter. So that is the area where checks will have to be conducted to see that the person who is coming is not colored and maybe with another motive or agenda. You must guard the civil service, protect it. You don't move into the military service just like that. So the civil service.
So in these transfers, is it 1 to 1 or 1 to 2? I'm talking about, is it a movement from a grade to a grade that's parallel to your previous grade, or one can move from his grade to a higher grade?
That much we still have to consult, because like I kept, your coming in should be streamlined in such a way that you don't come to disadvantage somebody who is already in the system before you are coming in. So I'm sure there will be a standard or a criterion through which it is done.
So from your perspective,
Right.
in view of the fact that other employees of other public services are not by law supposed to be neutral or anonymous or politically exposed,
Right.
and yet there's the possibility of either someone from those institutions being transferred or employed in the civil service.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that you don't bring your characteristic or caricature into the civil service at the expense of the principle of neutrality, anonymity, and permanence?
Right. Before someone comes in, it is important, comes in from outside the service. It is important that we pay attention to even what happens within the organization in terms of posting. Because the rules concerning posting says that posting should be done and it should be consistent with the exigencies of the service. What it means is that it should be done when it is established clear an urgent need. Someone possessing that skill, that knowledge, to come and then perform the function. So that is what happens or should happen within the service itself with regards to posting. That is for those who are working within. Therefore, the same principle should be extended to the one coming from outside the service. It should clearly be established that there is an urgent need or demand for the skill, knowledge that the person is bringing into the service. And so that criteria must be first and foremost. Having now identified a person or persons who possess some skill or knowledge that is urgently needed, now we go to step 2, which is the principles governing the organization in terms of...
But before you go to the principle,
right,
I want to really illustrate what you just told us to see whether we understand you clearly. That despite the fact that hospitals have been built, you don't go to the hospital because it is there for the public. You only go there when you are sick. And so despite the fact that...
Or you are visiting
or you are visiting somebody.
Yeah.
So despite the fact that there's the president has the power to appoint a public officer as a chief director, that must be based on need.
It must be based on need.
Clearly established that.
Yes, clearly, and one should be able to demonstrate that within the civil service, out of the more than 17,000 people who are now working within the civil service, at least as at the 2023 annual report. I've not looked at the 2024 one, so I don't know the total number of civil servants as at the 2024. But the 2023 civil service report, over 17,000 across the ministries.
No, it's about more than maybe 400,000.
No, you are talking about the public service. I'm talking about the civil service, narrowly defined. It's had 17,437 as a number in 2023. You should be able to, you should demonstrate, for instance, you want to fill the position of a chief director, that among all the directors within the service, you could not find anybody possessing the skill, the managerial knowledge, the expertise that you are looking for to fill that position within that ministry or within that particular organization. If we are to apply the principle of the exigencies of the service, that is, there must be an urgent need. And so you should do a critical assessment of the skills and knowledge possessed by the directors within the organization. And having convinced yourself that you've not found one, but that will also be an indictment on the service and whoever is heading it. It means that for all those years, you didn't develop persons.
In fact, I was coming to take on Mr. Krakrani on that angle because my check tells me that if you combine the civil and the local government service, you have a population of about 62,000.
Yes.
And so I wanted to find out from him, how has the CLOSAC collaborated with institutions like the Office of the Head of Civil Service to build capacity in the civil service to the extent that out of the population of over 60,000 employees, government cannot find a best fit, even one person, and that they need to go outside the civil service to bring somebody from the generality of the public service to occupy those positions.
Yes,
but you continue, then I think you can come in.
Yes, and so that question one should be posed to members of a council that have recommended someone from outside the service. And we have to then ask them, what kind of analysis did you do? Have you looked at the directors in that organization within that ministry, and you can convince us that you couldn't find anybody suitable for that position at the end of the day? Because for those of us who sit also on the promotional interviews, and people who come before you, who appear before you, can see that, I mean, there are men and women who have really built their competence over the years, who have acquired high level of knowledge, some with master's degrees, some with doctoral degrees, and they have got the skills and the knowledge to deliver. It's up to the council or whoever is appointing authority to convince the members that they couldn't find. And here I also think that the members within the civil service should just say it without interrogating this matter, should not just accept outsiders into the system without also asking these kind of questions. Because where they believe that there are persons who were qualified to have filled the position, but then those persons have been overlooked. Today, it is another person who has been overlooked. Tomorrow, it will be you. And so persons should not sit down and then fold their arms and then watch on concern when those who are at the topmost and are very close to the position of chief directors are being overlooked, although they have the skills and the knowledge to fill the position. So it is very important that the appointing authority and then the council should prepare a dossier on all the directors within the organization and then justify why a person has, or why they could find one or two persons to fill the position. Because even in the UK recently, before a university could actually appoint a foreigner, someone who is from another country, to the position of lecturership, the university must actually justify to the ministry that they couldn't find a British who was actually qualified for that particular kind of position. And it's led to a situation where many people, now it became very, very difficult for universities just to employ people who were British. And I think that the same standards should be applied. The standards that apply to things should be applied also to transfers into the service at the end of the day. And people should not just say that, oh, okay, this person is coming, we think that he has got policy expertise. Oh, he's got some specialized knowledge. Because as we have looked at, it's not just a matter of policy expertise. It's about the management of the organization. And so if you take aside the policy expertise, what about the management of the entire organization? Being the head of all those kind of classes, does the person possess it? And so the council, the governing council, should be able to also convince everyone that the person being transferred in does not possess only policy expertise, but the managerial expertise to manage the various classes and then the organization of the service. I think that those kind of things should be demanded of them.
Yeah. I cannot agree with you more. Because first and foremost, to answer your question, before I answer your question, he's challenging our individual civil servants to be bold, to challenge certain actions by appointing authorities, to prove that we are capable of. So to bring in somebody is not correct. As for the chief director, they apply and they contest, fine. But to say there is a critical need for somebody to come, that is an indictment on the council and then the head of civil service, for example, because they are supposed to be futuristic, to draw and look at the future, the next 10 years, what are the needs as we are growing dynamics, what are the needs of the civil service to meet the demand of the public, so that you start looking for such critical areas to advertise, to employ or recruit. So there should be no time for us to fall short for any outsider to be transferred onto us. It's an indictment. Then the second one is that you said, how far is closer collaborating or supporting the Office of Head of Civil Service in building the capacity? Let me tell you, we are a union, non-governmental institution, non-for-profit. Our funds are to be used for running the association. It is the employer's role, duty, to train and retrain the employees. Ours is to ensure that we call them or bring them to draw their attention once they are falling short of certain things. That doesn't mean we don't collaborate, and which we know, and they also know we collaborate too much self with them to do several other things. But it is incumbent on the employer to provide conducive working environment, train in the person, and retrain the person, send the person to exposures. That's why you say one of them is to roam, transfer them from place to place so that again they are exposed to several experiences. If for example, for no reason or the other known to them, they can't provide electricity for their rooms for 1 week, this is not for the union, it's for the employer. It's for the employer to provide resources. If for one reason or the other, for 4 years running, people are not trained or retrained on their jobs, then you are not having any future for the institution. The employer in this case is the Civil Service Council on behalf of Ghana government. They just delegate that power to them. So they are supposed to show that everything that is needed. We are collaborating by drawing attentions, collaborating by revising or reviewing the service, the appointment, what do they call it?
Civil service.
Civil service, what do you call it?
The regulations.
The regulations. The one, when you are appointed, there is something that defines what your role you have to play.
The scheme of service.
The scheme of service. If they are obsolete, we draw attention to them. If some are punitive, we draw attention.
But I also that used to run this program, the Nathan Kwao, what do you call it?
Yeah, series, lecture
series,
yes.
which is also part of the means by which people are educated.
Yeah, they are educated. The public, in addition to
the civil. The former immediate past head of service, Nana Jono, was here, and he also spoke extensively about the kind of support he's enjoyed from the CLOSAC in some training programs he organized. And I think this program is also part of it.
It's part of it.
Yeah, but then my issue is that I know when it comes to training and retraining, the civil service or Office of the Head Service, Office of the Head of the Civil Service, has through the Civil Service Training Center has been organizing periodic training. In fact, even last week, they had an online virtual training.
Yes, preparing them for examination.
And what have you. And sometimes it's even beyond, what do you call it? But my question is that if beyond all these training programs, the civil servant, and we still think that there is a critical need for somebody to be brought from outside.
I have answered that question. I am saying that for any manager of an or organization, you don't sit with what is on the status quo. You must have read into the future and see the growth of the organization and start thinking of how to provide certain needs. What you have now may be satisfying, but the next 5 years, what do you think?
Succession planning.
Yes, so that you start recruiting accordingly. The requirement will show on the act that we need an engineer, but critically should be an engineer sound, so that you don't have to wait until you are cornered before you start looking for one person, giving the opportunity to the employer or government to bring in anybody of his choice.
I think, unfortunately, this all time would permit
It's
us.
fortunate.
It's rather unfortunate. So let me take have your last statements, if your last take on this discussion.
Right. So
I'll come to
right. I think my concluding statement will be that the Civil and Local Government Service Association will have to stand up and then jealously guard what is left of the civil service, and at the same time lead the crusade for the reform of existing rules, regulations, and laws, and then take out clauses or rules that undermine the integrity and neutrality of the service. For instance, if you look at the current Civil Service Amendments Bill that has been proposed, whilst the clause that we say that a chief director is a public officer has been taken out, the one that has been replaced with is that a chief director, the office of a chief director is a post in the service. The notion of a post, it doesn't cure the mischief that we are trying to deal with. Because if you look at section 51, in terms of the filling of vacancies in the civil service, and the vacancy that is the service post, how they are filled in the civil service, somewhere out there, which is DI, it says that a post can also be filled by someone who is not a civil servant at the end of the day. And so they have to look carefully at the wording and rules and clauses in the Civil Service Amendments Bill. And it should be specific that the position of a chief director or a director or any other post within the civil service shall be filled by promotion, that is in terms of not just the initial recruitment, but after the recruitment, any other position that is up there, it shall be filled by promotion, that is by the appointment of a civil servant who will move from one grade to a higher grade, as we find in section 51 clause A of the service. And we should guard against the smuggling in of clauses that says that persons who are not even civil servants can be appointed to fill civil service posts. And so one should not be deceived with just the smuggling of a word like, now a chief director is the post of a chief director is a post in the civil service. It doesn't keep its chief. It should be must that it shall be filled by promotion of civil servants within the service. On that note, I civil servant to really guard jealously against infiltrations into the civil service, so that we'll be able to build a better Ghana and then recess Ghana to the days of the books when Ghana was Ghana and other people from other countries came to look at Ghana because Ghana was being touted everywhere as a beacon of hope for Africans' development.
So basically what you read with the intended reforms, it's like you want to protect your house, so you close the door.
Yes.
Yet you open the window ajar.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think at this point I will only call on CLOSAC members who are civil servants in the central and local governance structure in Ghana to work closely and support CLOSAC in everything that we are championing. They should be loyal and they should be seriously interested in the affairs of CLOSAC, because there is no other entity that can speak for than the CLOSAC. So they should rally their spirits behind CLOSAC, so that whatever we are guarding against for the good of the civil service will be well done. In fact, the executives cannot do much. The regional executives cannot do much. The district executives are not enough. But the officers in the institutions where things are being practiced on them wake up to give us information and be ready to defend it.
Thank you. Indeed, effective civil service is essential to modern day democratic society, and a measure of neutrality is necessary in order to preserve that effectiveness. Today we've been discussing the topic contested appointments and the erosion of meritocratic meritocracy in their service. I've been doing this with Dr. Daniel Appiah of the University of Ghana Business School, who now is a regular guest, also is the Deputy Executive Secretary of CLOSAC, Mr. Kojo Kakrani. I say a very big thank you to you for the insightful inputs and impact you've made on today's discussions. And we are hoping that next time we will be to invite you. You're more than willing to join us. Let me take this opportunity to thank all our viewers. You've been faithful with us, you've stayed by us, and all your feedback to us has helped us to continue to grow this program. To the Executive Secretary, the President, the National Executive Council, and members of CLOSAC, we say thank you very much for continuing to support us. We urge you to remain resolute and defend what is right, and also refrain from doing what is wrong. That is how you can empower your executives to be able to support you in all diverse ways. To the crew at Clock TV, my producer, and all technical crew, I say thank you very much for the wonderful support you continue to give us. Until we come to your homes, next time it is your regular host, Cephas Dosu, bringing you Resetting the Civil Service. Thank you for staying tuned.
Clog TV, Beyond the Policy.